Episode 13, Insufficient Postage. How other countries adapted while we waited.
At the end of last year, December 30th, 2025, a postal worker is delivering the last letter his country will ever send.
After 401 years of postal service, Denmark is ending it entirely. The letter goes to the Museum of Copenhagen as a historical artifact. Basically, the postal version of the end of Toy Story 3, but with fewer tears and more stamps.
It's an incredibly sad day. The iconic red mailboxes, there were thousands of them. The government put them up for auction. Nostalgic Danes crashed the website trying to buy them. They sold out in 3 hours.
People buying mailboxes as souvenirs of a service that no longer exists. Understanding how historic this moment is by sending the last letter to the Museum of Copenhagen. That's the part that gets me. It's not the anger, just this quiet grief for something that used to connect everyone.
Starting January 1st, 2026, so just 3 weeks ago from when we record this, mailing a letter in Denmark cost about $4.55. There are no mailboxes on street corners anymore. So you have to go to a kiosk, hand it to a private company that mostly delivers newspapers.
So how does a country just stop having mail? This isn't a collapse. Denmark is one of the wealthiest, most stable countries in the world.
They made a choice. Starting the late 1990s, Denmark invested heavily in digital government services. They built e-Box, secure digital mailbox system, and by 2014, they made it mandatory for government communications.
And mail volume dropped drastically, from 1.44 billion letters in 2000 to 110 million in 2024. Part of that is e-Box replacing government mail, but it's also email, online bill pay, all the same forces hitting postal services everywhere.
Right. The question wasn't whether mail would decline. Every country is dealing with that. The question was, what are you going to do about it?
And Denmark's answer was, we built a digital alternative first, we gave people 25 years to adapt, and then we ended the service.
Except 271,000 people were classified as digitally exempt. Elderly, disabled, and people who couldn't use digital mail systems. One advocacy group said we forgot to give them the same possibilities.
So even the country that's held up as the model for digital transformation still left 250,000 people behind.
Denmark built digital infrastructure for 25 years before making this decision. They invested heavily, got public buy-in, created alternatives, but they still couldn't figure out how to serve everyone.
In the United States, we couldn't even get started. In 1998, Postmaster General William Henderson wanted to give every American a free email address, protected by the same laws that protect sealed mail.
Congress and telecom companies killed it. They basically said, innovation in this economy? And in 2006, as you know, Congress made it illegal for the post office to offer new digital services at all. While other countries were experimenting, we were being legally grounded by our parents.
Declining mail volume is a global problem. Every postal service faced the same challenge in the 2010s.
But countries tried wildly different solutions. Some privatized, some stayed public, some diversified. Denmark built alternatives first, then transitioned away from physical mail.
And the question is, what can we learn from them?
Because some of these experiments failed spectacularly, and some of them worked incredibly well, allowing this public institution to serve the public fully. But the United States wasn't allowed to learn from any of it. I'm Aileen Day.
And I'm Maya Warner-Langenbahn, and this is People of Agency, a podcast about the U.S. Postal Service, public institutions, and the ordinary people who built them, broke them, and fought like hell to make them work for everyone.
Today we're looking at what happened to postal services around the world during the 2010s while the post office was fighting for survival.
We're starting with the disasters, because if you want to understand what happens when you get postal privatization wrong, the United Kingdom just spent the last decade showing us exactly how bad it can get.
Act 1. When privatization goes wrong.
Okay, let's go back to October 2013, when the British government is about to sell Royal Mail, a 500-year-old institution that's been delivering letters since Henry VIII was king and busy collecting wives. The Conservative government under David Cameron says Royal Mail needs private investment to modernize and compete, but really it's ideological.
Conservatives wanted to privatize it for decades. Thatcher tried to do it in the 80s and the 90s, but couldn't figure it out. Tony Blair's Labour government tried in 2009, abandoned the plan after Labour MPs and postal unions revolted.
So Cameron finally gets it done, and the sale is a complete mess from the start. The government massively undervalued Royal Mail. On the first day of trading, shares jumped 38%. Investors made £750 million in profits immediately.
And the government, the taxpayers, just left that money on the table. Basically a winning lottery ticket left on the bus. JP Morgan, one of the banks advising on the sale, reportedly valued Royal Mail at 3 times what the government actually sold it for.
3 times?
3 times. The National Audit Office published this very polite British report saying the government could have achieved better value for the taxpayer, which is British for, you absolute muppets, you got absolutely fleeced. I almost did an accent, but that would have been not nice.
Wrong. You absolute muppets. And some of these priority investors, the ones who were supposed to hold shares long term and stabilize the stock, they sold within weeks, just flipped them for quick profits.
So, okay, the sale was botched, but maybe, and hear me out, privatization still makes the service better?
If by better you mean it gets catastrophically worse, Royal Mail is supposed to deliver 93% of first-class mail the next day. In 2024 to 2025, they're delivering 76.5% on time. They've failed to meet the target for 3 consecutive years, missing it by 16 percentage points. And during Christmas of 2024, 10.7 million people, that's 22% of UK adults, experienced delays.
Big Grinch energy to do that during Christmas.
Yeah, really.
3.4 million of them missed vital health appointments, bills, legal documents, because the mail was late. Citizens Advice said the service deterioration has become business as usual at Royal Mail.
Business as usual. That's damning. And Ofcom, the regulator, is levying massive fines. £5.6 million in November 2023, £10.5 million in December 2024, £21 million in October of 2025. That's £37.1 million in fines in just 2 years. And Royal Mail still isn't fixing anything.
Because under privatization, they're not trying to provide the best service. They're trying to maximize shareholder value, which means cut costs. In 2022, they announced 10,000 job cuts, on top of 2,000 managerial cuts from 2020. By 2025, they're planning to cut 7,000 to 9,000 daily delivery routes within 2 years.
Nearly half of their delivery routes. How do you cut half of your delivery routes and still deliver the mail?
You don't. You deliver it late. Or you lower the standard so that late becomes the new on time, which is exactly what they did. In July 2025, UK reformed the Universal Service Obligation, the legal requirement to deliver mail to everyone, everywhere, at affordable prices.
And they gutted it. First-class mail in the UK is supposed to arrive next day. Second class is the slower, cheaper option, supposed to arrive in 2 to 3 days. They just reduced second-class delivery from 6 days a week to every other weekday.
Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So if you mail something second class on Thursday, it might not even be picked up until the following Monday. It's basically traveling by carrier pigeon at that point. And they lower the delivery targets. It used to be 93% of first-class mail arrives next day. And 98% of second-class mail arrives within 3 days.
So they made it legal to be worse at their jobs, because as a private company, they can't keep up to what the public institutions were doing. And if you're only delivering second-class mail 3 days a week to some addresses, is that really universal service anymore?
It's not. They changed the definition to make privatization look less catastrophic on paper. And Maya, would you believe me if I told you that they're cutting all of this service and treating their workers worse?
Yeah, I would believe that they would do that because that sounds like something corporations who are money hungry would do. The workers went on strike. Royal Mail wanted to impose 10,000 layoffs, cuts to sick pay, and compulsory Sunday working. They were trying to turn postal work into gig economy labor. The Communication Workers Union held a vote. 98.7% voted for strike action.
And that's not 87% and not 94%. It's 98%. They held 18 strike days involving over 100,000 workers, the biggest strike action in the UK in years. In July 2023, they finally reached a settlement with 10% salary increases, but only after massive disruption.
So, less mail service, cutting workers. Surely these savings get passed on to the people?
In 2013, when Royal Mail was privatized, a first-class stamp cost 60 pence. Today, it costs £1.70. That's a 183% increase in 12 years, almost 3 times more expensive. And since 1971, stamp prices increased 5,400%. First-class stamps in the UK are now among the most expensive in the world.
So, worse service, fewer workers, higher prices, and a company that's paying tens of millions in fines because they can't meet basic standards. And then, April 2025, Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky, EP Group, acquired Royal Mail for £3.6 billion.
And the UK government sold Royal Mail for $3.3 billion in 2013. So even after a decade of mismanagement, the company was worth more than what the taxpayers got.
And now, 68% of UK citizens want Royal Mail taken back into public ownership. There's a group called We Own It that's been polling on this, and the numbers are overwhelming. People tried privatization, watched it fail in real time, and now they want their postal service back. The Netherlands tried something similar. PostNL was fully privatized, and in 2024, they're in such bad shape that they asked the Dutch government for €68 million in subsidies.
Wait, after being privatized, the private company asked the government for subsidies?
Yeah, and the government said no.
I mean, good?
They just flat out rejected the request. PostNL's CEO, Pim Berendsen, described the situation as unsustainable.
Mail volumes dropped 70% over 2 decades, from 20 million items a day to 6 million. They eliminated Monday delivery in 2013. They're removing 300 of 11,000 mailboxes, and they're proposing to move to a 48-hour or even 72-hour delivery standards.
3 days to deliver a letter. Berendsen said, "We don't want to become the next Denmark." But PostNL is threatening legal action if the government won't compensate them for loss-making public service. So the private company is saying, we can't make money delivering mail. Either pay us or we're going to stop delivering mail.
And their stock collapsed 75% from its post-pandemic peak, while they're still paying dividends to shareholders.
Of course they are. A researcher at The Conversation, a network of nonprofit news outlets, described this extended privatization process as a disaster.
New Zealand did something sneaky. They avoided full privatization in 1993 after public opposition, but they achieved the same outcomes through what the postal union workers called privatization by stealth. You systematically degrade the service until it's barely functional, which unfortunately sounds all too familiar to us. Urban delivery went from 6 days a week to 3 days. They removed over 1,300 post boxes nationwide.
In 2013, New Zealand cut 2,000 jobs. That's 20% of the workforce. The weird part is they cut urban service more than rural service. It's like cutting the engine to save the car. While neither should be cut and one cut isn't better than the other, this one made no sense. Urban delivery is way more profitable.
It defies all economic logic, but it was a political concession.
Meanwhile, a private competitor in New Zealand called DX Mail cherry picks the profitable routes while New Zealand Post has to maintain universal service to everywhere, including remote areas that lose money.
So you don't even need to formally privatize to get the same terrible outcomes. Just underfund it, cut service, raise prices, and wait for people to give up.
And then there's Argentina. In 1997, President Menem gave a 30-year government-granted contract that gave a company controlled by the Macri family the right to operate, control, and profit from Correo Argentino, their postal service. 4 years later, in 2001, the corporate group entered bankruptcy with nearly $900 million in debt.
4 years. 4 years from privatization to bankruptcy. The government terminated the contract in 2003, and under state control, Correo Argentino has a surplus and is profitable. In 2024, President Milei tried to re-privatize it as part of the Ley Bases law. But Congress removed Correo Argentino from the privatization list.
Because they remembered what happened last time.
That's the pattern. The UK privatized and service collapsed. 68% want Royal Mail taken back into public ownership. The Netherlands privatized it and they're begging for subsidies. New Zealand degraded service without formal privatization and got the same results. Argentina privatized, went bankrupt 4 years later, and went back to public ownership successfully.
But what if there's a different way? Not every country failed, and that's what makes this so interesting. Because while all these disasters were happening, other countries figured out how to make it work. Some stayed public and thrived, some privatized strategically.
Some built banks, some built electric vehicle companies. One country did something so successful that it ranks #1 in the world for postal service quality 8 years in a row.
Get ready, because the Swiss are building an empire. Act 2. When public ownership works. Switzerland has been ranked #1 in the world for postal service quality by the Universal Postal Union for 8 consecutive years, a perfect score of 100. And Swiss Post is 100% state-owned, operates without taxpayer subsidies, and made a profit of 324 million Swiss francs in 2024.
Wait, public ownership, no subsidies, and profitable? Tell me more.
Oh, I would love to. They recognized letter mail decline back in 2000, way earlier than most countries, and began transformation immediately. They didn't wait until they were in a crisis. They diversified into 4 distinct market segments: communication, which is traditional mail; logistics, which is parcel delivery; financial services through Post Finance, which holds over 100 billion Swiss francs in assets; and passenger transport through Post Bus, which carries 183 million passengers annually across 950 routes.
A bus company? So they turned the postal service into a logistic company, a bank, and a bus company.
Exactly. And it works because they're allowed to do it. The Swiss government said, mail volume is declining. What else can postal infrastructure do? And the answer was a lot. PostBus connects 25% of Swiss municipalities that have no other public transport. They run routes through mountain valleys and remote villages where no private bus company would ever operate. And the Postal Service cross-subsidizes it.
And then there's Post Finance. That's postal banking. Swiss Post has been doing banking since the 1900s. They have 2.4 million customers, which is a significant portion of the Swiss population. They offer checking accounts, saving accounts, mortgages, credit cards, all normal banking services. What's crucial is that they're required to serve everyone. If you live in a remote mountain village, and no private bank wants to open a branch there, Post Finance is still there.
And they're not just doing traditional banking. They launched this digital identity service called Swiss ID that has 3.4 million customers. They're doing cybersecurity service. They've made acquisitions to expand those capabilities. They have ePost, which is a digital post box with over 100,000 private users. They're integrating with the healthcare system for electronic patient records. They even built the world's most advanced e-voting system, which has been used in multiple cantons, Switzerland member states, since 2023 after rigorous security testing.
So while our post office was being told it couldn't even sell phone cards, the Swiss were running the digital infrastructure of their entire democracy.
Right. The CEO, Roberto Cirillo, said employees are our greatest asset, which is a stark contrast to the privatized posts we just talked about, where workers are getting laid off by the thousands.
And Postbus has done some really innovative stuff. In 2016, they became the first operator of autonomous public transport buses globally. They ran this operation called Smart Shuttle in Sion, these self-driving buses. And the 3-tone horn that Postbus uses is protected as a natural cultural heritage of Swiss identity. The horn sound is literally part of Swiss identity.
So the lesson from Switzerland is that public ownership plus diversification plus early digital transformation equals sustainable success. They didn't wait for a crisis. They adapted while they still had resources to invest.
Now let's talk about a completely different model. Germany did privatize, but they did it strategically in a way that actually worked. Deutsche Post was privatized between 1995 and 2000, but the key difference from the United Kingdom, the German state retained a 20% ownership of Deutsche Post, and the remaining almost 80% is publicly traded.
So the government kept significant influence after privatization. Between 1998 and 2002, Deutsche Post went out and bought DHL International.
Wait, DHL, the shipping company?
The shipping company. DHL was founded in 1969 by 3 Americans, was already one of the world's largest courier companies, and Germany's postal service bought it. So when you ship something via DHL anywhere in the world, you're using a company owned by the German postal service. That transformation turned Deutsche Post from a declining letter carrier into the world's largest logistics company. They operate in 220 countries with 570,000 employees. In 2022, their revenue was 94.4 billion euros, with 8.4 billion in operating profit.
Deutsche Post still delivers 61 million letters daily in Germany. DHL's global profits help support domestic mail delivery in Germany. That's the whole point. They diversified so the profitable international logistic business can cross-subsidize the declining domestic letter business. The numbers are impressive. Their post and parcel German division alone had 16.8 billion euros in revenue and 1.3 billion in operating profit. So they're still profitable in Germany while also running this massive global operation.
What made German privatization work where UK privatization failed is Germany had a regulatory framework. Deutsche Post had an exclusive right to deliver letters under 50 grams until 2008. That gave them over a decade to buy DHL, build new revenue streams, and transform the business before private competitors could come in and cherry-pick the profitable routes. Labor protections were maintained during transformation, and the government ownership stake ensures public interest is still considered in major decisions.
But my favorite Deutsche Post story is Street Scooter. In 2010, Deutsche Post needs electric delivery vans. So they go to German manufacturers and say, we need electric postal trucks. And the manufacturers say, we don't make those.
So Deutsche Post says, hold my beer, we'll make them ourselves. They founded their own company, developed the Street Scooter electric van, and by 2020, they've deployed over 15,000 of them. They eventually sold the production to a Luxembourg company called Odin Automotive, but they maintained a fleet of over 42,000 electric vehicles globally.
And comparing that to the post office, Our Grumman long life vehicles were designed for a 24-year lifespan. They're still operating 25 to 32 years later. They're basically ovens on wheels, no air conditioning, 8 to 10 miles per gallon. The post office spends $106 million on maintenance in 2019 alone. The next generation delivery vehicle procurement launched in 2015. The contract wasn't awarded until 2021. The first delivery started in 2024.
So Deutsche Post said, we need electric vehicles. Nobody makes them, so we'll build 42,000 ourselves. And the post office said, we need electric vehicles, started procurement in 2015, and 9 years later, we're still waiting.
That's the difference when you're allowed to innovate versus when you're legally constrained. The key lesson from Germany is that privatization can work if you have the right regulatory framework, if you protect labor, if you allow diversification, and if you give companies transition time.
Now, let's talk about France. La Poste transformed into a public-owned company in 2010, but it remains 100% state-owned. It was transferred to Caisse des Dépôts et Consignations, which is like a state investment bank. And La Poste employs more people than any French company except the government itself.
And the big innovation in France is La Banque Postale, which is created in 2006. It has 10.8 million active private customers and 400,000 business clients. What makes it different from regular banks is La Banque Postale is the only bank in France legally required to provide universal banking access.
Which means they serve 3 million vulnerable households. They're France's leading provider of banking to vulnerable citizens. People who can't get accounts at regular banks, people in remote areas, people with low incomes, immigrants, the elderly, La Banque Postale has to serve them. And they're profitable while doing it. They acquired CNP Assurances, which has 36 million policyholders across 19 countries. In 2023, their net banking income was 7.6 billion euros.
So postal banking can work at massive scale while fulfilling a social mandate. It's not some utopian fantasy. France is doing that right now, serving millions of people, making a profit.
And La Poste has this incredible program called Veiller sur mes parents, which translates to watch over my parents. They launched it in 2017 to combat senior isolation. Postal carriers visit elderly subscribers 1 to 6 days a week, depending on what the family wants. That's so sweet.
I know. 40,000 of La Post's 73,000 letter carriers are trained in elder care. After each visit, a carrier sends a report via an app to designated family members. Did your mom seem okay today? Did she answer the door? Did she seem confused or unwell? By 2020, it had over 9,000 clients, and during COVID lockdowns, temporarily made free.
That's so sweet. Wow, the infrastructure that made this possible. La Poste visits virtually every French address daily. They already have carriers walking to people's doors, so why not train them to check on isolated elderly people and give families peace of mind? It's using the last mile infrastructure for social good.
And the U.S. Post Office has the same infrastructure. We visit virtually every American's address daily. We could be doing elder check-ins. We could be doing postal banking. But Section 102 of the 2006 law prohibits it. Elder check-ins isn't traditional mail delivery, so it's illegal for the post office to offer it. Apparently, being helpful is against the rules.
France's overall financial results in 2023 were 34.1 billion euros in revenue, with 514 million in net profit. And parcels are now 53% of group revenue, while mail is only 16%. They managed the decline of letter mail while growing other services.
So France shows that public ownership plus banking integration plus social innovation equals profitable public service. Postal services can do so much more than deliver letters if we let them.
And then there's Japan. Japan Post went through gradual privatization beginning in 2007 under Prime Minister Koizumi, who literally framed an election as a referendum on postal privatization. The government stake declined from 100% down to about 36% by 2024, but it still remains the largest shareholder.
But the real story is Japan Post Bank. It has over 205 trillion yen in assets, which is roughly 2.2 trillion US dollars. That makes it one of the world's largest banks. They have relationships with nearly all 115 million Japanese adults. They have over 23,000 post office branches, which is Japan's largest branch network. It reaches every corner of the country, including remote islands.
Japan Post also does elder care innovation, similar to France. They have this watch over service. They call it Mimamori, where carriers check on elderly customers. In 2015, they partnered with IBM and Apple to provide iPads with custom apps for medication reminders, community activities, shopping assistance. This is in a country where over 33 million people are seniors, projected to be about 40% of the population. Isolation is a massive social problem, and Japan Post is using its infrastructure to address it.
And their parcel delivery innovations are really creative. They do date and time specific delivery windows. They have golf club delivery straight to courses, airport luggage services, integration with convenience stores for pickup and drop off. They're thinking about how postal infrastructure can serve modern needs.
Now, Japan Post isn't perfect. In 2019, there was a major scandal. Over 90,000 cases of inappropriate insurance sales targeting elderly customers. 3 top executives resigned, over 3,000 employees were punished. So even successful models face accountability challenges, especially when dealing with vulnerable populations.
But the lesson is still important. Postal banking can work at massive scale. $2.2 trillion in assets proves it's viable. Innovation is possible beyond traditional mail. You just need proper oversight to prevent abuse.
Okay, so looking at these success stories. Switzerland stayed 100% public, diversified into logistics, banking, buses, and digital services. Profitable, no subsidies, and ranked number 1 in the world.
Germany privatized strategically with government keeping a stake, acquired DHL to become a global logistic giant, and built 42,000 electric vehicles in-house. Profitable while maintaining universal service in Germany.
France stayed 100% public, built a postal bank serving 10.8 million customers, including 3 million vulnerable individuals, launched elder care programs, profitable while fulfilling social mandate.
Japan did mixed privatization with government as the largest shareholder, runs a $2.2 trillion bank serving nearly every Japanese adult, innovates in elder care and logistics, profitable at massive scale with accountability challenges.
In the United States, Section 102 of the 2006 Postal Accountability and Enhancement Act made it illegal for the post office to offer non-postal services.
Swiss Post digital identity system prohibited. Deutsche Post in-house electric vehicle development would require congressional approval the post office couldn't get. La Poste elder check-in service prohibited. Japan's Post 2.2 trillion in assets explicitly prohibited.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand introduced the Postal Banking Act multiple times. It never advanced. The Trump task force in 2018 explicitly opposed the post office expansion into sectors where the Postal Service does not have comparative advantage.
So while the rest of the world was experimenting with different models, some failing, some succeeding, the United States legally locked the post office into a dying business model and then blamed it for losing money. It wasn't an accident, it was a choice.
Which brings us back to the United States in the 2010s. What was the post office actually doing while all this was happening around the world? And why couldn't we learn from any of it?
Act 3. What America was doing and not doing. All right, so let's talk about what was happening in the United States while all this global experimentation was going on. Fiscal year 2012, the post office reports a loss of $15.9 billion, the worst loss in postal history. Headlines are everywhere. The post office was bleeding money. The post office on brink of collapse. Time to privatize.
But remember that pre-funding mandate we talked about last episode? The one that forces the post office to pre-fund 75 years of retiree health benefits in 10 years? Something no other agency or company in America has to do? In 2011, Congress defers that year's $5.5 billion pre-funding payment to the next year. They say, you don't have to pay this year, just pay double next year.
Which is like telling someone drowning, don't worry, we'll throw you 2 anchors tomorrow instead of a life vest today.
So 2012 hits, and the post office owes $11.1 billion just in pre-funding payments. The Postal Inspector General did an analysis, and of the $62.4 billion in losses between 2007 and 2016, $54.8 billion of it, 87%, came from the pre-funding mandate. Without that mandate, the post office would have been profitable or break even in most years.
So, as we've talked about, the crisis was manufactured. Congress created this impossible burden and then blamed the post office for collapsing under the weight of it. Patrick Donahoe becomes Postmaster General in October 2010. This Pittsburgh guy who started as a clerk, making almost $5 an hour in 1975, worked his way up over 39 years, and he walks into the job knowing the math does not work.
He can't fix the pre-funding mandate. Congress won't change the law. So he tries to cut everything he can. 100,000 jobs through attrition. Remember, that's the no layoff clause from the 1970 strike we talked about in episode 10. Nobody gets fired, but as people retire or quit, those positions don't get filled. Career employees drop from 583,908 in 2010 to 495,941 in 2020. That's 88,000 fewer workers.
He consolidates 141 mail processing facilities, eliminates 21,000 delivery routes, and his big proposal, the one that actually polled at 71 to 80% public support, was ending Saturday mail delivery.
But in March 2013, Congress blocks it. The Rural Letter Carriers Association votes unanimously for Donahoe's dismissal. The National Association of Letter Carriers stages 112 rallies in 50 states. Hallmark Cards and the greeting card lobby spend over $1 million fighting it because 60% of greeting cards get delivered by mail.
The greeting card lobby, Big Sparkle, wasn't about to let their Saturday revenue go without a fight. And I want to be clear, I'm all for Saturday mail delivery, especially for the workers whose jobs depended on it. But if we kneecap the post office financially with this pre-funding mandate, then block it from fixing its balancing sheet, and then act shocked when it keeps losing money, that's not mismanagement, that's design.
And the Government Accountability Office rules that the cuts would be illegal without congressional authorization. So Donahoe can't cut Saturday delivery, he can't fix the pre-funding mandate, and he's still expected to break even.
It's like being told to bake a cake, but you can't use flour, can't turn on the oven, and if the cake doesn't rise, you're fired. And then Congress stands to ask why there's no frosting.
By the time he leaves in February of 2015, he's saved $15 billion through cuts. But the post office has defaulted on $33.9 billion in pre-funding payments and hit the $15 billion debt ceiling. He did everything he could within the system, and it wasn't enough because the system itself was rigged.
And here's something most people don't know. The Postal Service has a board of governors, 9 members appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate. From December 2014 to August 2019, that's almost 5 years. The board didn't have a quorum. By December 2016, all 9 seats vacant.
Every single one. Trying to fly a Boeing 747 with an empty cockpit and a "coming soon" sign on the door. Like, how does that even happen?
Senate confirmation failures. Obama nominated people. Senate didn't confirm them. Trump nominated people. Senate didn't confirm them. For 5 years, the Postal Service is governing itself without the proper oversight during the worst financial crisis in history.
So basically, the government doesn't work. Shocker.
At no point of today's episode is the government working. They had to create something called a temporary emergency committee just to keep operations running. But major strategic decisions require board quorum, which didn't exist.
Meanwhile, the actual business is transforming whether Congress wants it or not. First-class mail, that was 52% of revenue in 2010, by 2020 it's down to 33%. Email, online bill, people just aren't mailing letters like they used to. But packages, that's the opposite story. Package revenue grows 170%, from about $10.5 billion to $28.5 billion.
By 2020, packages are 39% of revenue versus 16% in 2010. So the post office is transforming from a letter carrier into a package delivery service, which is smart. That's adaptation. But they're trying to do it while Congress won't let them raise rates enough, won't fix the pre-funding mandate, and won't let them offer new services.
And workers are the ones who pay for all of this. Between 2011 and 2013, all 4 major postal unions go through arbitration for new contracts, and they all end up with 2-tier wage systems. New hires earn 20 to 25% less than legacy workers doing the exact same job, and they'll never catch up. A letter carrier hired in 2012 will make less at top pay than someone hired in 2010, even if they do the same job for 30 years.
By 2024, about 120,000 employees are working under this diminished pay scale, and non-career positions expand. City carrier assistants, postal support employees, mail handler assistants, positions with fewer benefits, less job security. Mandatory overtime becomes endemic despite contract limitations.
In 2015, the post office does this workplace satisfaction survey called the Postal Pulse.
Great name.
Incredible name. Phenomenal branding. The post office ranks in the first percentile.
Which is very bad.
Not good.
The absolute bottom. Usually have to try pretty hard to get that low of a score. It's the last kid picked for gym class energy for sure.
It's also like, did you ever hear the rumor that you can only get below a certain score on like the SAT or ACT as long as you write your name?
They didn't even put their name on the postal polls.
They didn't even try. Only 17% of employees report being engaged at work. Workers are reporting they rarely receive recognition. Their supervisors don't care about them. There's no opportunity for growth. Carriers are working 53 consecutive days during Christmas peaks. People are doing the jobs of 2 or 3 people because those positions aren't getting filled.
So if you're wondering why your mail carrier looks exhausted, this is why.
In February 2015, Megan Brennan becomes Postmaster General, the first female Postmaster General in its 245-year history.
And she fixes everything.
Incredible. She's a 28-year veteran who started as a letter carrier in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and her approach is different from Donahoe's defensive cuts. She focuses on technology investment and customer service, launches informed delivery nationwide, negotiates rate reforms, testifies before Congress 8 times trying to get them to fix the structural problems.
First woman in the 245-year history is wild, though. And she gets the prize of dealing with Trump. Multiple times during his first term, in private meetings, Trump pushes her to double rates on Amazon. But Trump isn't concerned about operational inefficiencies or workers' exploitation. He's convinced that Jeff Bezos is getting some sweetheart deal, and much more importantly to him, that the Washington Post, which Bezos owns, is being mean to him.
Oh, he's getting bullied.
Yeah.
So he wants to punish Amazon through postal rates for completely personal reasons. Very normal, very cool.
Britain responds with data and stands her ground. Trump happens to be right that there are problems with the Amazon deal, but he's right for entirely the wrong reasons. And she's defending the partnership based on the official numbers.
At the heart of this is Amazon Sunday delivery. November 2013, the post office announces the partnership. First time the post office is delivering on Sundays at scale for regular packages. It begins the same weekend in Los Angeles and New York and expands rapidly. By April 2014, 459 hubs across 22 districts are delivering 2.7 million packages on Sundays. By 2020, the post office is delivering 75 to 80% of Amazon packages during weekdays.
Sounds like a success.
Except the Postal Inspector General found the Amazon rollout created operational inefficiencies. There are real questions about whether the post office is charging enough to cover the full cost of delivery. We're potentially subsidizing Amazon's dominance while our own workers are getting squeezed with two-tier wages and mandatory overtime.
Not great. Where Deutsche Post acquired DHL and became a global logistics giant. Or Japan Post doing innovative delivery service. The post office partners with Amazon, but Section 102 means we can't expand into e-commerce services ourselves. We can deliver Amazon's packages, but can't compete with Amazon's platform. We're the sidekick that does all the work while the hero gets the movie deal.
The other innovation from this decade is informed delivery. Last episode, we talked about the post office installing mail scanning equipment for security. So someone says, what if we let people see those images before their mail arrives? You get a daily mail email with pictures of what's coming. They pilot it in Northern Virginia in 2014, expand to New York City in late 2015, and nationwide launch is April of 2017.
By January 2019, there are 14.9 million users. By 2020, there are over 50 million subscribers. And in 2025, Informed Delivery had a 94% user satisfaction. This is the post office innovating creatively despite legislative constraints, using existing infrastructure to create genuine customer value.
Remember all those failed services from last episode? Ecom, Intel Post, Electronic Postmark, all launched and canceled. Informed Delivery succeeded because it used infrastructure already in place and didn't require new regulatory approval.
But even with that success, the post office is still struggling with basic infrastructure. By 2020, they're 26 to 33 years old. No air conditioning, so carriers are dealing with 120-degree temperatures in the back.
In some places, carriers are literally passing out from heat exhaustion in these trucks.
They get 8 to 10 miles per gallon. Modern safety features are lacking, and the post office spent $706 million on maintenance in 2019 alone. So in January 2015, the post office issues a request to start replacing these vehicles. The contract is awarded 6 years after the request is in. The first cars aren't used on deliveries until 2024, 9 years from identifying the problem to first deliveries.
Meanwhile, remember Deutsche Post in Germany? They needed electric postal trucks in 2010. German manufacturers didn't make them, so they built their own company and deployed over 15,000 by 2020. They saw a problem, solved it in-house, built 42,000 electric vehicles globally. We saw the same problem in 2010, and we're still waiting in 2024. Our bureaucracy moves with the speed of, say, a 30-year-old mail truck.
That's the difference between a postal service that's allowed to innovate versus one that's legally and financially constrained.
So that's the 2010s for the post office. Cutting 88,000 jobs, closing 141 facilities, defaulting on $33.9 billion in pre-funding payments, operating without a board of governors for 5 years, imposing two-tier wage systems on 120,000 workers.
But also adapting where they could. Package revenue grew 170%. Informed Delivery got 50 million subscribers. Megan Brennan stood up to presidential pressure. Workers were still delivering to every address in America despite impossible conditions.
But they weren't just accepting it. In the 2010s, postal workers launched the most significant labor campaign of the decade.
And they won.
4. The Staples fight, when workers said no to privatization. Late 2013, the post office announces a new partnership. They're going to put mini post offices inside 82 Staples stores across 4 states. Sounds convenient, right? Post office services where you're already shopping for office supplies.
Except there's a problem. These mini post offices aren't staffed by postal workers. They're staffed by Staple employees making $9 an hour, compared to postal workers making about $25 an hour. And Staples employees get 4 hours of training. 4 hours. Compare that to the extensive training postal workers receive.
There's no background checks, no postal oath. And when the American Postal Workers Union starts digging into this, they find internal post office documents revealing plans to expand to 1,500 stores or more and migrate the majority of retail volume to retail partners. This isn't a pilot program. This is privatization without calling it privatization.
So in January 2014, APWU launches the Stop Staples campaign. The president is Mark Diamondstein, and he's been organizing postal workers for years. He understands something crucial. It's not just about Staples. If the post office can hand retail work to low-wage Staples workers, what's next? Can they hand deliver routes to Amazon? Can they contract out mail processing? It's about defending the line.
April 24th, 2014, they hold a national day of action. Thousands of postal workers and allies protest at over 50 Staples stores across 27 states. They're picketing outside stores, handing out flyers to customers, explaining what's happening. And customers are listening because people actually like their postal workers. They trust them.
The campaign is smart. They're not just protesting. They're building a coalition. In November 2014, APWU files an NLRB complaint alleging that the post office failed to disclose agreement details and bargain properly. They're using legal tools in direct action at the same time.
And then the boycott expands. The AFL-CIO, which represents 12 million workers, adds Staples to its official boycott list. And that's huge. That means union members across the country, not just postal workers, are being told not to shop at Staples.
The American Federations of Teachers, 1.6 million members, announce a boycott. And this is critical timing because Staples makes a lot of money during back-to-school season. Teachers are a core customer base. And now teachers are boycotting. And you do not want to get on the bad side of 1.6 million teachers who need 3-ring binders.
The National Education Association joins. UNI Global Union endorses boycott actions in 26 countries. This is an international campaign now. And Staples is feeling the pressure because back-to-school season boycotts are hurting their bottom line.
For 3 years, this campaign runs. 3 years of sustained activism, protests, boycotts, legal complaints, and coalition building. And it works.
November 8th, 2016, administrative law judge Paul Bogus rules for the union. The finding is that the post office provided incomplete and misleading information and intentionally ignored its legal obligation to bargain. The judge orders the partnership discontinued.
In January 2017, the post office announced the termination of the Staples partnership. APWU calls off the boycott and declares victory.
This is the most significant postal labor victory of the decade. This matters because workers used the power they built in the 1970 strike, which we talked about in episode 10, to defend against backdoor privatization in the 2010s. That power is still real. Unions can still organize, build coalitions, and win.
And it set a precedent. You can't just hand postal work to contractors. There are legal requirements. There's a bargaining process. And if you try to circumvent that, workers have tools to fight back.
But it's important to recognize these are defensive victories, not offensive gains. Workers prevented the worst outcomes. They stopped Staples. But they couldn't reverse the two-tier wage system. They couldn't expand job protections. They couldn't force Congress to fix the pre-funding mandate.
When you're spending all of your energy fighting off a tax, you don't have energy left to push for improvements. And that's by design. Keep workers constantly defending, and they can't organize for more.
But the Staples victory proves something important. The power postal workers won in 1970 still matters 40 years later. Collective bargaining still works, direct action still works, building coalitions still works.
And workers need every bit of that power because the structural problems Congress created weren't going away. The pre-founding mandate was still law. Section 102 still prohibited innovation. The Board of Governors was still mostly vacant. The post office was still defaulting on payments.
So let's talk about what the 2010s cost the post office and what we lost by being legally prohibited from trying what worked elsewhere. Because this isn't just about one decade, it's about roads not taken and possibilities we gave up.
Act 5. The roads not taken. And what comes next? Let's start with what we know works because other countries proved it. Universal email addresses. Henderson's 1998 proposal could have given every American an email address, privacy protected by sealed mail laws, which means the government can't read your emails without a warrant. No corporate surveillance, no monetization of your data, digital identity controlled by citizens, not Google or Microsoft.
Section 102 made this illegal. And now we live in a world where Gmail and Outlook can scan your messages for advertising, where tech companies track everything you do online, where your digital identity is owned by corporations. We could have had a public alternative. We chose not to.
And postal banking. This is the one that makes me the angriest because the need is so obvious. 59% of post offices are in zip codes with 0 or 1 bank. 24.6 million households are unbanked or underbanked. And those people spend $9 billion annually on payday lenders and check cashers charging 400% interest rates.
Basically, it's expensive to be poor in America. The current system likes it that way. The post office already sells 58.5 million money orders every year. We have the infrastructure. We have the trust. 68% of Americans have confidence in the post office versus 26% in banks. Senator Gillibrand estimated postal banking could generate about $19 billion annually for the post office while serving millions of people who banks won't touch.
France is doing that right now. La Banque Postale serves 10.8 million customers, including 3 million vulnerable households. They're the only bank in France legally required to provide universal banking access. And they're profitable. 7.6 billion euros in net banking income in 2023.
Japan Post Bank manages $2.2 trillion in assets, serving nearly every Japanese adult. Switzerland's Post Finance has over 200 billion francs in assets. This isn't a fantasy. Postal banking works at scale. We're just not even allowed to try it.
And there's digital trust services. We talked about electronic postmark last episode. This was 13 years ahead of blockchain. The post office could provide legally recognized digital authentication right now. Every contract, every document, every digital signature could be verified by a trusted public institution.
Instead, we pay DocuSign and other private companies for what the post office could provide as a public service. Section 102 made expansion illegal, so we gave the market to private corporations instead.
And then there's elder check-ins. 40,000 French postal carriers are trained in elder care. Each visit, they send reports to family members via an app.
The post office visits virtually every American address daily. We already have carriers walking to people's doors. We could train them to check on isolated elderly people, give families peace of mind, combat the loneliness epidemic. This is what public institutions can do. Use infrastructure that already exists to serve public needs, not just maximize profit. A private company would never offer this service because isolated elderly people aren't a profitable market segment.
But elder check-ins isn't traditional mail delivery, so Section 102 prohibits it. We're legally prevented from using our infrastructure to serve the public in new ways. There's also in-house innovation. Deutsche Post needed electric postal trucks in 2010. German manufacturers didn't make them, so Deutsche Post built their own company, Street Scooter, and developed over 15,000 electric vans by 2020. They had a total fleet of 42,000 electric vehicles globally.
The post office identified the same need in 2010, started procurement in 2015, contract was awarded in 2021, first deliveries in 2024. That's 14 years from need identification to delivery. And we spent $706 million on maintenance in 2019 alone, keeping these 30-year-old trucks running with no air conditioning.
The pattern is clear. When postal services are allowed to innovate, they can solve their own problems. When they're legally and financially constrained, they can't. It's hard to win the race if you're driving a toaster from the 80s and the rules say you can't buy bread.
Now let's talk about what the academic research actually shows. Because there's this narrative that privatization is always better and public ownership always fails. And that's not what the evidence says.
An Oxford study from 2012 found that the post office was the most efficient postal service among G20 nations. 270,000 letters per employee, nearly double Japan's post, 100,000 letters per employee. The Universal Postal Union ranks the post office 7th globally with 83.5 points. Switzerland is ranked number 1 with 100, Austria 2nd with 96, Germany 3rd with 95. We're ranked higher than the UK, higher than France, higher than Canada.
The Brookings Institution did research in 2025 looking at postal privatization outcomes globally. They found that privatization is associated with higher profitability, but full privatization does not consistently improve service quality. Privatization is associated with higher prices, and financial and operational challenges persist across all ownership models.
So privatization can make more money for investors, but it doesn't necessarily improve service for citizens, and it usually costs more. That's the trade-off. It's the premium plan, where the only thing that's premium is the bill.
UNI Europa, which is a labor federation, did a study on European postal services. Since 2001, 170,000 postal jobs have been cut in Europe. That's about 20% of the workforce, and wages have been cut up to 30%.
So the pattern across countries isn't that privatization is good or bad. It's that ownership structure matters less than diversification, innovation, investment, proper funding, and labor protections.
Denmark succeeded at going digital, but only because they spent 25 years building e-box first and made it mandatory. Even then, they left over 270,000 people behind. The UK privatized without proper regulation, and it became a disaster. The Netherlands fully privatized, and now they're begging for subsidies.
Switzerland stayed public, diversified early, invested in digital transformation, and ranks number 1 in the world. Germany privatized strategically, kept government ownership stake, protected labor, allowed diversification, and built a global logistics empire. France stayed public, launched postal banking, serves vulnerable populations, and is profitable while fulfilling a social mandate.
Japan did mixed privatization, built a massive bank, innovates in elder care and logistics, but had accountability failures with vulnerable populations. The lesson isn't public equals good and private equals bad. The lesson is that diversification, innovation investment, proper funding, and the labor protections matter more than ownership structure. The countries that succeeded either stayed public or kept significant government control. Because when profit is the only motive, who invests in serving rural areas? Who protects workers? Who diversifies into services that might not be immediately profitable?
And we're going to come back to that next episode. But for now, it's clear. The post office wasn't allowed to try any of it. Section 102 made it illegal to diversify. Rate caps prevented proper funding. The pre-funding mandate manufactured financial crisis. Congressional gridlock meant 15 years of reform attempts all failed. And political ideology said government can't run businesses despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary.
Add corporate lobbying on top, private competitors like FedEx, UPS, banks, telecom companies, they spent millions preventing the post office from adapting. Because if the post office offers email, that threatens telecoms. If the post office offers banking, that threatens payday lenders. If the post office competes in logistics, that threatens FedEx and UPS.
So they wrote Section 102 into law and created the pre-funding mandate. Then they pointed the post office losing billions and said, see, government can't compete. We need to privatize. It's the same playbook from the 1980s. The Grace Commission, Reagan's privatization attempts, and workers defending through union power.
The difference is that in the 2010s, workers are still winning defensive battles like Staples, but the underlying system is still rigged against them. And that brings us to what's coming next.
The 2010s taught us that the crisis was manufactured. Workers bore the costs through 88,000 job cuts, two-tier wages, and rock-bottom morale.
And the world showed us different paths. Denmark eliminated postal service after building 25 years of digital infrastructure. The UK privatized, and service collapsed with 68% of citizens wanting renationalization. Switzerland stayed public and ranks number 1. Germany diversified successfully. And France built postal banking serving millions. Japan Post runs a $2.2 trillion bank.
So America needs to figure out, do we want public alternatives to corporate services? Do we want email that doesn't scan our messages for advertising? Do we want banking that doesn't exploit poor people? Do we want digital authentication not controlled by private companies? Do we want innovation that serves public good versus shareholder profit?
Because the post office has the infrastructure. We deliver to 154 million residential addresses, plus 12.6 million businesses across 9.7 million square kilometers. We handle 44% of the world's mail volume. We rank among the most efficient postal services globally. We have a constitutional mandate for universal service that creates obligations no private company would accept.
But the international comparisons show that the principles apply regardless of ownership. Diversification works, technology investments work, proper funding works, labor protections work. What doesn't work is legally locking a public institution into a dying business model and then blaming it for not adapting.
And that's what the 2010s were. The post office survived a manufactured crisis. Workers won defensive victories. But the underlying structural problems remained unresolved. The pre-funding mandate was still law until 2022. Section 102 still prohibited innovation. The Board of Governors still lacked a quorum until 2019.
And then in 2020, everything changes because a new Postmaster General is about to be appointed. The pandemic is going to make mail-in voting essential, and mail delays are going to become a national crisis.
The 2010s were about surviving with both hands tied. The 2020s are about fighting for the Postal Service's existence, and that fight is happening right now.
Next time on People of Agency, the last episode of the season, we might have a few bonus episodes pop up in the feed, but our next episode will be where we leave this narrative post office tale. We'll talk about Louis DeJoy, COVID-19, mail sorting machines getting dismantled, election mail delays, and the battle that brought postal workers, union organizers, and millions of Americans into the streets to defend an institution most people take for granted.
How long can you defend an institution that's legally prohibited from transforming? And what happens when someone comes in who actually wants to destroy it?
We'll find out next episode. I'm Aileen Day.
I'm Maya Warner-Langenbahn, and this is People of Agency.
Thank you for listening to People of Agency. The institutions are messy, the people in them are complicated, and the fight over who they serve has never ended.
If you appreciate what we're doing here, digging into uncomfortable complexity instead of easy answers, leave us a review. Please share this episode with a friend. It's the best way for people to find small podcasts like ours. Find us on social media at people_of_agency.
Thank you for your support, because telling honest history, that's how we build better institutions.
People of Agency is created and written by Aileen Day with additional writing by Maya Warner-Langenbahn. It is hosted by Aileen Day and Maya Warner-Langenbahn.
This episode was edited by the amazing Kelsey Ruppersberg Day. Our beautiful cover art is by Sam Woodring. We have extensive sources for all of our episode linked in the show notes. Thank you to the post office for being the post office and having an incredible story to tell. Support your local post office by using postal services regularly. Mail a birthday card. Send your long-distance friend a piece of mail just for fun. There's no feeling like getting a piece of personal mail.